Good morning again. Now, yesterday there were several comments of people who were confused about the assignment, and I would just like to ask you to keep in mind that this is new for most of us, teachers as well, so it might take some time before we are all able to adjust this, to just do it, and before things start running perfectly. So, as we did for the previous lesson, I would like to ask you to use this video, the transcript, and the online resources in order to answer the questions that are in the Google form, okay, and then will be graded. And in particular, today's inquiry question, which is about Oliver Cromwell. Remember, we're talking about the English Civil War, and Cromwell, we will see, was one of the leading figures of the English Civil War. So today's question is, as you can read in the title, was Oliver Cromwell a hero or a villain? In order to tackle the question, we need to understand three things. First, who was Cromwell? Second, why was he a villain? Why was he a villain? And why was he a hero? Got it in the wrong order here, but number two is why he was a villain, and number three is why he was a hero. Now, Oliver Cromwell, keep in mind, is a very controversial figure. Some love him, some hate him. And today what I wanted to do is to present you some facts about his life, some reason why people consider him a villain, and some reason why some people consider him a hero. It depends a lot on where these people are from. The Irish, for example, and we will see why really hate Cromwell. The English tend to have a more favorable opinion of Oliver Cromwell. So, who was this guy? Now, he was the son of a rich farmer from Huntingdon, a member of the gentry. He was not a member of the nobility, he was not a knight, for example, or a lord. He was just a rich person who didn't need to work for a living. And he did not come from London or Newcastle or other big city, but from a small town called Huntingdon in Cambridgeshire. He rose to prominence, meaning that he became important during the English Civil War, the thing we have been talking about for the past month and a half, where his talent, Oliver Cromwell's talent as a soldier, allowed him to become first a cavalry officer, leader of a troop of cavalry, and then eventually the leader of the entire parliamentary army, the New Model Army, if you remember from last week. This made him a very, very powerful man in the country. Now, we are skipping through most of his life because we don't have time and because I don't want this video to be extremely long. But, very quickly, in 1649, he signed, together with other people, the document that allowed the execution of King Charles. So, as we can see, 1640s, he was a soldier. 1649, he was a general and a successful one, important member of the parliamentary army. Now, by 1649, the Kingdom of England, since there was no king anymore, had become the Commonwealth. That is a sort of republic, a state that is ruled by parliament instead of by a king. We'll see the extent of that, to what extent that was true in a few minutes. In 1650, Parliament chose him to lead the English army against the Irish Catholics, who had revolted in the previous years and who used to support the king. Remember, King Charles was sort of favorable to Catholics, even though he was not a Catholic himself, and therefore the Irish, who tended to be Catholics, sort of supported the kings, but also wanted to be independent and wanted to kick out the English, which they saw as being, alien, foreigners. Now, there Cromwell did some things that are not exactly nice, to put it mildly. Some call it even genocide, but we will see it then again. We'll see that in a moment. At that time, Parliament had won the Civil War. Remember, Roundheads and Cavaliers? Eventually, the Roundheads won the war. Parliament won the war. However, Parliament was really not in a great shape. And several generals within the New Model Army believed that they would be better rulers because the New Model Army was a very religious organization. Those generals were very religious, and they believed that they had been chosen by God. To make a very complex and long story short, Cromwell dissolved what was left of the English Parliament. He went there with 40 soldiers and simply kicked out the members of the Parliament that were left. It was not the first time a parliamentary general would do that, but he did. He established a new bare bones parliament, bare bones as in essential, the bare bones. And this parliament was manned by people who were elected for their religious credentials because they were very pious and very religious. Now, this new bare bones parliament was convened. They elected Cromwell as the Lord Protector. This is a very important thing. He became the Lord Protector of the realm, effectively giving him the powers of a king, even though with a few more checks and balances on his power. He was not an absolute king, but he was the guy in charge. He was the Lord Protector. Now, he ruled for 5 years, doing his best to, in his own words, heal and settle the country after the disaster of the Civil War, and he was largely successful. Must be credited with this. However, as we said, he's still a very divisive figure. Some consider him a hero, others consider him a villain. He died in 1658. Now, why was he a villain? I'll give you 3 points. First, he was a very, very religious man, and there is nothing wrong in being very religious, but at the time, religion could be very intolerant, okay? And the Puritans especially could be very somehow fanatic of their own religion. I'm simplifying a lot. If there are any serious historians listening, I apologize, but many members of the parliament at the time were very religious, but Cromwell seriously believed that he was on a mission from God. One of the results of this idea was the declaration that throughout the countries, most forms of entertainment, sports, theater, bear baiting, there was this sport in which people simply, how do you put it, poked bears for entertainment. 17th century, people liked this sort of things. Because all these forms of entertainment were seen by the Puritans as the gateway to sinfulness. You go to the theater, you have a laugh, you see a man dressed as a woman, you laugh and you have a good time, and therefore you will be sinful. Okay, this is the way they taught. Instead of going to work, you go to the theater, and this opens the way to sin. Furthermore, and this is the famous bit, he banned Christmas celebrations, because also, according to Puritans, people enjoyed Christmas celebrations too much, and therefore it was again sinful and should be banned. There is a video in the transcript, at the end of the transcript, in the online resources section, which explains that. Now, second point. So, made fun illegal, to simplify it a lot. Then there is the question of the Irish rebellion. Remember, the Irish Catholic rebelled. He repressed the revolt with absolutely unprecedented violence, even in a very violent age like the 17th century. Remember, we talked about the global crisis. Remember, we talked about war being everywhere. Even in a period like this, the repression of the Irish revolt was very, very violent. And this was partly motivated by the fierce resistance put on by the Irish. If they had surrendered before, maybe there would have been more leniency. Cromwell would have been a bit more flexible. However, the other reason was his religious zeal. He was a Protestant and a Puritan at that, and the Catholics were his mortal enemies. He was not fighting against people, he was fighting, in his own eyes, against the Antichrist, against a mortal religious enemy who was threatening the salvation of everyone. Now, it is estimated that about 1/3, more or less, of the entire Irish population, so 1 out of 3 people, that is not little, died of starvation, died of violence, or were either sold into indentured servitude, which was a form of slavery in America. Okay, so they were embarked into ships and sold as slaves, effectively, in the West Indies in America. all the land, or 90% of the land that belonged to the Irish Catholics, was then taken from them and given to the English Protestants. To this day, the Irish really, really, really hate Oliver Cromwell, because the repression made by Cromwell was the beginning of a very difficult period in Irish history, which lasted until 1916, when Ireland became an independent republic. Third point, some people say that, to summarize, no fun allowed, first point. Second point, Irish rebellion. Third point, some people say that England became a republic when it turned into the English Commonwealth. A republic is a country that is not ruled by a king. Many others, however, believe that it was actually, under Cromwell, it was actually closer to a military dictatorship. A dictatorship is a system where one group of people is absolutely in charge. In this case, it was the army, okay? The army was in charge, and whoever disagreed was punished very severely. Cromwell was a soldier, okay? And he appointed people like him as local governors. This is called the rule of the major generals. Furthermore, while he had fought a war to allow Parliament to rule without a king, remember the Civil War? War fought to defend the rights of Parliament, okay? While he fought in the Civil War to protect the rights of Parliament, he would very quickly call for new elections, dissolve Parliament, whenever the members of Parliament did not do what they were told by him. So he's got a mixed reputation in this regard. So those are the three main reasons why some people consider him to be a villain. His Puritan attitude, his suppression of the Irish revolt, and his military dictatorship. Again, those are disputed among historians. Now, why do certain people consider him to be a hero? First of all, he was a brave soldier. This is how he went on from being the son of a farmer, essentially a rich farmer, into being the leader of the country. He was a leader of a cavalry unit in the New Model Army, contributed to creating the New Model Army, and the New Model Army, as we studied last week, you should remember, became the core of what later evolved into the modern British Army. So he certainly has a very strong historical role in creating the British Army. Second, he was a man of the people, okay? He rose again from being a sort of a farmer to being a soldier to being the ruler of a country. And while he did not want to revolutionize the social order, he did not want to bring peasants to power, for example, he still did his best to modernize the country to allow for a bit more social mobility. He also put an end to the wars that the country was waging against France and the Netherlands. He was able to bring peace. Last point, he was very, very religious. We said that already. But while some people say that his being religious made him an intolerant person, others say that his religious spirit made him just as fair as possible. Okay? He was seen as the strong leader, the strong man, the fair and just and capable and morally guided man the country needed to get through that terrible period of chaos that was the Civil Wars. We didn't really study how bad the Civil Wars were for England and for English society, but think, just to give you an idea, that more or less 1/3 of the English population died. More in proportion to the total population, more people died during the English Civil War than during World War I and II combined. Someone at the time even compared him to Moses from the Bible. The same way Moses had guided the Jewish people across the Red Sea out of danger into the Promised Land, sort of. So it was said that Cromwell had led the English nation through civil war and into lasting peace, which is somewhat true. Now, so what were the three reasons people consider Cromwell a hero? First, created and modernized the army. Second, social mobility, and he was able to bring peace to the country. Third, his religious spirit, while his Puritanism pushed him to ban certain things, also spurred him to be as fair as possible, and people saw him as a just leader. So these are the facts. Those are the points of, rather than the facts, the point of views about Cromwell. Now it's up to you to decide whether or not Cromwell was a hero or a villain or anything in between, based on what we said and based on your own judgment. Use this information to finish the activities in the Google form, and see you next week.